Now you go. Two functions you know more about than I do. What about this? Where am I going wrong?
I would say that FE is more like awareness of group morality and group feelings rather than being it. Like, I think.
Right. Okay.
If I'm going
I'll write that down.
It's almost like
taking notes.
It's like the phrase "when in Rome, do as the Romans do." It's like
right.
You're going in there and you're sort of aware of it, but you're not necessarily. I think there's a stereotype of FE being very conformist.
Yeah.
And I actually think that all the types can be conformist if they like find their people. Like FI types can be very conformist when it comes to values, FI values that they share with another group, for example.
Yeah.
I do think that FI kind of wants to be the new FE and like wants to be the new TE. So I'd say it's more like awareness of the group morality and group feelings and the normal values and managing them and being able to like move in and out, move with them. Maybe FE leads more drawn to it than FE auxiliary, but yeah. And yes, emotion reading.
Do you agree with that, Joyce? What Jonathan said? That I should. I'll put awareness in there.
I would say it's like using emotional information in decision making, but it's more about the group emotional information and using it in decision making.
It's almost like FE is just as empirical as TE. It's just that they're looking at different kinds of facts.
Yeah. All the extroverted functions are like empirical.
Yes. I'm glad we agreed about that. Right, I'm just gonna.
But I like to say empirical as opposed to objective because all the functions are objective. A lot of people use the term objective and empirical as if they're the same thing, but really, I like to distinguish the two.
Yeah, I've got 3 definitions of objective that people use. Like if someone's being impartial, they'll sort of say, "You've got to be objective in this situation. You need to look at things with a cool head," that kind of way. And then there's objective as in really, 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 really true, and you don't need to observe it. Like 2 + 2 = 4. That's that kind of objective. And then the third kind of objective is like what Jung meant by looking at objects and stuff. But okay, that just means empirical. So empirical is what names the actual thing that Carl Jung was described on.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I wrote in a note that, well, when it comes to sound, there's not really an object, but there is an empirical thing there, like a vibration. So yeah. Anything I should add to these subfunctions? Any changes that I should make?
Probably, but I can't think of them right now.
Okay. FI then.
Oh, I would put empathy with FE. But
this is where we have a different version of
FE. There are different types of empathy. Like cognitive empathy is a bit more FE.
Yeah, I'd like.
Catherine has like 7 different types of empathy, actually. So
that'd be good to do an event on that.
Yeah.
So FI is empathic in the sense. Okay, people describe empathy as putting yourself in another person's shoes. FI and FE both do that, but they do that in a different way, and there's a bit of a clash there. So FI kind of puts themselves on the other person's shoes, like they're emphasizing themselves. How would I feel in that situation? Whereas FE is a bit more put yourself in the other person's shoes, emphasizing the other self, almost like changing a bit.
But I would say that FI has the ability. So when I'm writing a character, when I'm writing this play, I'm writing a female character that's Christian, and she's like soliloquizing, and she's very upset. My aim was to put myself inside the center of her character, not as myself, but as her.
Exactly. That's more That's a bit.
So
more
you're saying that's FE?
I'd say it's more FE than FI.
So why is it that the FI people tend to be good at that though?
Because they get really they're still using FE. They're just coming from FI first. I would say if you listen to George R. Martin in interviews, I think he's an FI user. he says that all the characters in his books, Game of Thrones, they're all him. They're all versions of him, no matter what they are. Like, because he's trying to speak to this kind of what he sees as sort of universal humanity, common shared humanity. So he started with himself. I think Freud was in FI time, and he kind of had a bit of that as well. Like, he was trying to develop a universal theory of psychology, starting with himself and his own experience and dreams. So it's like the FI type is kind of a real depth of feeling.
Yeah.
They can imagine themselves in all these different kind of situations with different identities and so on. But there's still a sense of they're starting with themselves and then going to this person, whereas with the FJs, it's like they're noticing the other person first. And then in that, so FE is, in a way, FE by itself can be sort of shallow, emotionally shallow. You'll see that more with the FI polar types, like the ESTP and ENP.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're bad at doing that thing of putting themselves in somebody else's shoes as that person, not as themselves in that.
But they are quite good at reading people and manipulating.
Yeah, I think. So if you look at the way Kersey describes like NFs, and he talks about introjection, I think FE is very good at introjecting the emotions of somebody. But when you've got this this is highly speculative, isn't it? When you're talking about like, is it FE or FI when you're like imagining what's going on inside somebody's head in terms of feeling states. Well,
there's also intuition there as well.
Yes.
But
yeah, fascinating thoughts. I agree with both of you. I'll say one of the differentiations you can make between FI and FE empathy is FE is synchronous and FI is asynchronous. So FI it happens in its own time. So it's almost like it's not really empathizing for that moment in time, but it's almost like it's time traveling. A lot of FI users will tell me that their empathy exists outside of the moment, almost, if that makes sense.
Right. There's a dichotomy in socionics that's I'll let you get in a moment, Jonathan. I just want to say this thing like where socionics has this idea that FI and TI are static, so it's like a configuration, like say a logical configuration or an ethical configuration, and TE and FE are more dynamic. It's more related to the situation.
Yes, I agree. So, FE is generally more contextual, and FI is asynchronous. Yeah.
So those FI types that told you that were the INFPs specifically, or all FI types? Joyce.
Oh, for the asynchronous and synchronous?
Well, you said the FI types associate empathy with time. I'm just wondering if those were the all FI types or if they were just like the INFPs and stuff. Because associating FI with time, that sounds a bit like a combination of FI and NI to me.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not describing this or doing it justice. I always feel like I'm describing like 5% of what I actually mean. So
I get that.
Yeah, you feel me, Jonathan. You're the same way. Solidarity. Yeah. And so with asynchronicity, it's almost like it exists in a time, in a space without time itself. FI, a lot of FI people, they'll describe it like they store FI impressions over time. And so when a situation comes, they're comparing it to like, I see it as all introverted functions store stuff. So FI stores emotional impressions over time. And so when it sees an event happening, it's applying all of those emotional impressions that it's had before to this situation. Yeah. Whereas FE's just seeing the current event for the current event's emotional implications. Yeah.
Yes, but there's also that part of FE that has to do with an attentiveness to sort of like the social norms, and like what are good manners, and like those things might something that's more permanent, like the accepted thing, the done thing. But generally, I definitely agree that the memory and past experience is a big part of the subjective factor of something. Like you might have a favorite song because it reminds you of you maybe met somebody when you heard that song or something. Or so yeah, these are my scores from